What's up, everybody? LA Lim coming to you. It's another beautiful day in Los Angeles, and welcome to episode 9 of the greatest albums of all time. I've had a lot of fun doing this series for you, and it's my pleasure to bring to you my love of great albums. In the last episode 8, I featured 2 albums at the same time, and that episode got so much positive response that I decided to do it again. In episode 9, I'm going to feature 2 albums on the same episode, same program. And these 2 albums will be 2 original motion picture soundtracks. And these 2 albums were soundtracks to 2 historic movies that launched what they called in the motion picture industry as blaxploitation films. Blaxploitation films were films that in the early 70s, really kind of took advantage of black cinema. Black Star made some not terribly expensive films aimed to the black marketplace, and it was pretty much between 1970 and 1975. 1976 was the era of blaxploitation films. Probably 2 of the first films of that kind were of 1970, a movie called Cotton Comes to Harlem, directed by Ossie Davis, and Sweet Sweetbacks, a badass song directed by Melvin Van Peebles. But the 2 movies that truly defined the blaxploitation era, and probably the 2 most popular movies of that era with all audiences alike, of all races, and the basis for 2 outstanding motion picture soundtracks were 1971's Shaft and 1972's Superfly. And I'm featuring today, I am profiling the original soundtrack albums recorded by Isaac Hayes in 1971 and Curtis Mayfield in 1972. Shaft, the movie, was truly a defining movie of its time, because it's probably the first film that featured the newly renaissanced black man, the black man who was beholden to no one, who was afraid of no one, and was all man and every sense of the word. And Isaac Hayes locked on to that with his outstanding soundtrack to that film, including the title track to soundtrack, which was, of course, the theme from Shaft. Probably the defining lyrics of that song, the lyrics that were so popular that they became a part of the Americana lexicon, was the lyric where Isaac Hayes says, "You see that cat, Shaft is a bat." And of course, you know what they said after that, "Shut your mouth." And of course, my favorite line from that song was the line after that, where Isaac Hayes says, "He's a complicated man, and no one understands him but his woman, John Shaft." That's right. The album Shaft became a national breakout hit for Isaac Hayes, the biggest hit of his career. It in turn made an even bigger hit for the movie Shaft. The album Shaft went all the way to #1 on the Billboard charts, and it was honored at the Grammy Awards, winning 2 Grammy Awards, and it was honored at the 1972 Academy Awards, where Isaac Hayes became the first black person to win the Academy Award for Best Original Song for the theme of Shaft, which Isaac Hayes wrote, of course. And as the album, in the years to follow, the mythical status of the album just grew, and in 2014, Library of Congress received that album and inducted it in its Hall of albums that have achieved aesthetic and artistic importance, such as the legacy of the original motion picture soundtrack album Shaft. And not to be outdone, in 1972, probably a hero who was of just as much mythical and mythic status as Shaft was a guy who played a pimp named Priest, a pimp who was somewhat ambivalent about his status, but they called him Superfly. Superfly, starring the great Ron O'Neal himself. By the way, of course, Richard Roundtree played the iconic Shaft. People of Superfly, Sig Shore, went to Curtis Mayfield, asked him to come up with a soundtrack just as good as Shaft, and boy, did he deliver, coming up with some great songs that showed the inner city as far as all of the dangerous trappings of inner city life, ghetto life. Pusher Man, and of course the themes, not to mention of course Freddie's Dead, a song that went #1 on the R&B and pop charts, and of course the theme song to the great film Superfly, original theme song to Superfly. All of those songs written and composed by Curtis Mayfield, and that album in itself also gained mythic status, going all the way to #1 on the Billboard pop charts, where it was there for 4 weeks. And the soundtracks to both Shaft and Superfly led to even more soundtrack albums throughout the 70s, and of course even more blaxploitation films that would come out in the following years, including my personal favorite, Tamara Dobson as Cleopatra Jones. But in the early 70s, the two albums that came to truly defy the great soundtrack albums of two of the greatest blaxploitation films of all time were of two men of such incredible mythic status that even now, 40 years later, they are still held in high reverence. And that is John Shaft and Superfly. Shaft released in 1971, Superfly released in 1972, and of course the two soundtrack albums were just as popular, if not even more popular, than the films themselves. The original motion picture soundtrack of Shaft by Isaac Hayes, and the original motion picture soundtrack of Superfly by Curtis Mayfield, two of the greatest albums of all time. This is L.A. Lim coming at you again. I hope you liked this episode. Give me a shout out. Let me know what you think. Did something a little different. Everyone liked the 2 album profile episode, so I decided to do that again and profile 2 great soundtrack albums that define what was known as the blaxploitation era of films. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about these 2 albums or any other albums in the series that I've recorded. This is L.A. Lim saying ciao bella.